My name is Kirsten Moss, and I'm the Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Stanford. And really looking forward to our session, our regional session on New York today. Thank you for coming. You know, I'm a little sad because every summer I get a chance to come out to New York and meet some of our prospects out there. And with the global pandemic, that's obviously not possible today. And we really have thought about how do we bring Stanford to you in a still personal way, but do it online. So what we would have done last year is an information session. An admissions officer like myself would tell you about the program, what's distinctive, and really talk about how to put your best foot forward in the application process. And then the second thing we would do is hear from a panel of students and alumni who have experienced the GSB. And what we've seen from our research, from our surveys, is that's really the most important thing for most of our prospects, to see themselves at the school, understand that experience. So today we're really going to focus on that for 45 minutes. We know in Zoom, we don't want to keep you on the screen for, an hour and a half. So we're just going to do this part. We're going to do panelist introductions first. I'll do that. And then after that, we're going to have a moderated Q&A. So I'll start off with a couple questions, but it's really going to be up to you to submit your questions via the chat box, the Q&A box, so I know what's on your mind and we can make sure you get the most out of the session as possible. And just a reminder that this is really the panel part of the session. So if you're interested after spending some time with us and want to learn more, I highly encourage you to come to one of our virtual information sessions so you can learn more about the admissions process and what you can do to put your best foot forward in your application. Now, one more tip, I think, as we're starting to head in the session is as you meet our panelists, they all come from very different backgrounds. One thing you can do as a prospect in thinking about your application process is really, we ask you questions like what matters most and why in your essays, or what do you want to get out of your MBA, why Stanford? As you listen to student stories, I'm sure that will help you begin reflecting on what you are interested in accomplishing. So I hope you keep that in the back of your mind as you hear from our panelists. Now I'm going to ask, we have 5 panelists today and we purposely selected them from the region of New York. So they've all gone to school on the West Coast and moved back to the East Coast. But we've made sure that they're coming from a variety of industries, healthcare, gaming, consulting, tech, but also different functions. So we have a chief of staff and product marketing, general manager. And I'm going to start off with asking Jack to introduce himself, his class. And the first question I'd love you to answer, each of the panelists, is tell me about an academic experience that was meaningful to you at Stanford.
Awesome, thanks, Kirsten. So Jack Armstrong, originally from the UK. Before business school, I was an operational restructuring consultant. So I specialized in turnaround and transformation projects all across the world. After business school, I'm going to work in private equity operations. So I'm going to be chief of staff for a portfolio company out on the East Coast, just outside of New York, working on behalf of the fund with the healthcare pharma company to hopefully drive some improvements over the next few years. In terms of my favorite academic experience, I think MGE for me as a whole is my favorite class at business school. MGE stands for Managing Growing Enterprises. And it's really taking a lot of what we learn about leadership and management and applying it to real world situations. So we have the protagonist of a case in the class, we work through the case. The professors really drill in and dig in and make us role play various scenarios. And then we get to hear what actually happened as an outcome. And so for me, it was a fantastic experience because it took all of the learning that we'd done and applied it in practice in the classroom. And we had a chance to speak to some of the amazing guests.
Awesome, fantastic. And I'm going to leave this panelist description up here while they speak about their the first question and their names, and then we'll take it off so you can see their faces. So Michelle, let us know.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Baumgartner. I'm calling from the woods of northern Wisconsin, so if I break up, bear with me. But I'm originally from Toronto in Canada, so I grew up there, but I went to college at the University of Minnesota. I worked for Accenture in strategy consulting before the GSB. I did an internship at WeWork in New York last summer, and then I'm going to be starting in a couple weeks as a product marketing manager at Unity Technologies. So it's a gaming startup in San Francisco. And then my favorite, Jack like almost stole mine, but I have a backup. Mine, I have to say, so I was a business undergrad, and I was in some ways somewhat skeptical that I was going to be repeating a lot of the same classes. But I think one thing I was just really, I fell in love with, and I was pleasantly surprised to find out at business school, was there are these sort of more interpersonal and intrapersonal classes that I've really enjoyed, and we'll be, I'm sure, talking more about them. But one of them was touchy-feely. I also took Art of Self-Coaching and Lives of Consequence. And so I think those types of classes, the more soft skill classes, are really the highlight of my experience.
Eric, let's move to you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I think I was born and raised in New York City. So shout out to all the New York City folks on the line. And I joke that I grew up as the son of an abstract painter and a lung doctor. So I was interdisciplinary from the beginning. And the way that showed up for me professionally is just post GSB, I worked at McKinsey before joining Capsule as director of product. Before that, I was on design thinking consulting, so a lot of deep user research and creating new products and services. And I would say one of the standout academic experiences to me was in Rob Siegel's Industrialist Dilemma class, where you have some of the titans of industry come in and talk about how they view innovation, disruption, and what's happening in their industry. And then you also have some of the disruptors who are coming in. So hearing, for example, from an autonomous vehicles CEO, right after hearing from Ford CEO about the future of mobility, I think created a really rich cross-functional perspective that I loved and gained a lot from.
Aditi, why don't you start?
Sure. Hi, I'm Aditi Banga, graduated from the GSB in the class of 2015. So it's been 5 years, which is a little crazy. I can't believe how quickly the time has gone. Before the GSB, I started out working in management consulting. I was at the Monitor Group, which is now owned by Deloitte. And then I spent 2 years working in mobile gaming as a product manager, actually for a startup that was started by members of the class of GSB 2010. And then after that, after the GSB, I was initially based out in the Bay Area working for Apple for their movies and TV division. And then my husband and I are both from New York originally. So a couple of years ago, we relocated back here. I am now at Instagram working on our media partnerships team, focusing specifically on shopping. So working with just a number of brands and media partners on, commerce-related activities on the platform. My favorite class of the GSB, let's see. So I also really loved MG, but another one that I was a big fan of is this class called Leadership and Entertainment, which is typically a second-year elective, but you can also take it as a first year. And it's just an incredible speaker series where every session you have members of different parts of the entertainment industry visit and talk about what it's like to work in the industry. So really get that real world perspective.
Great, thank you. And Will, how about you?
Hey y'all, how's it going? I graduated from GSB last year, so I've been out for about a year now. Before that, I had worked at Bain & Company in Chicago, and before that had gone to Notre Dame. For me, Eric actually stole mine. I love the Industrialist Dilemma as well. But probably my second favorite class, because I also was doing my master's in ed at the time, was a class called Leading U.S. Schools, which was taught by a practitioner who runs the largest charter network in Los Angeles. So he would fly up from Los Angeles once a week to teach our class. And he brought in 10 speakers over the course of the year who had tried, and in most cases had failed, to turn around large US public school systems. And I thought that was fascinating because it was so topical to a lot of the big education debates we're having. Many of them had a business background, and also many of them had actually failed. And so you got to hear from people who I think we saw had succeeded, but others who had not succeeded, and talk about what the differences driving that might have been.
Oh, that sounds cool. Well, thank all of you for the introductions, and I'm going to the chat right now. And one of the first questions, which is great since we're doing the New York region, is Caroline wanted to know, could you talk about the GSB network in New York City? And I've heard this a lot as I'm out on the road, that students realize many of our alumni love the Bay Area and stay. So how was it to both come back, and what's the community like there now? And maybe Aditi could speak to that, and then Eric, because you guys have been out the longest.
Sure. It's great, actually. So it's funny. I'm guessing in absolute numbers, it's smaller than the Bay Area, but kind of maybe it's because it is a smaller community. I actually find that I spend a lot more time with the GSB community here in New York. In the Bay Area, I think the bulk of my GSB time was spent with my close friends from my own class, but less so with members of other classes, or partaking in some of the more optional activities that you can do after you graduate. So things like the Women's Circle, which is an ability to kind of form a network of women across different GSB graduating years, and you come together, once a month and just talk about like both professional and personal topics. And that's something that I'm participating in here. So in some ways, I found that I've tapped into more of the GSB resources based out in New York. And I think there's also something exciting about, like, you meet somebody else from the GSB here in New York, and you kind of feel this immediate like kindred spirit, and it feels a little bit more special because there might be fewer of you. So I found that it's been a fun way to bond with people as well.
Awesome. How about you, Eric?
I think that was extremely well said. I echo and agree with everything. And the only piece I'll add on is, because people who are self-selecting to go to New York, it's a slightly more active choice. I think it tends to have that extra special sense of community because of it, which I agree with everything that was said.
Eric, how did you think about recruiting, trying to get back out to New York when you were your second year? Was that challenging, or?
Yeah, it's a great question. I personally ended up starting with McKinsey in California and then transitioning back to New York. And I think there are a lot of people who make the choice to stay for a year, 2 or 3 in the Bay Area, and then either stay forever or later move back, because there is kind of this special moment that can happen just after graduating to be with a large portion of the class. When it came to coming back to New York, it really helped to be able to reach out to the alumni network. Like, genuinely, it was extremely helpful. And honestly, during school, I know some people who it took an extra effort to recruit back and forth with New York. But I think the folks who determined that was what they wanted to do all achieved it.
Awesome. That's great. One of the questions that have come in is about leadership from Andrew. Which leadership experience at the GSB was most transformative for you, and how? Everyone mentioned their favorite classes, but would love to learn more specifically about how it transformed those leadership capabilities. So maybe we'll start with Michelle and Jack. You guys are recent, it's top of mind, I'm sure, some of these things for you.
Yeah, I'm kind of caught between sharing 2 experiences, but I think what came to mind first was, so I was in this class called Startup Garage, which is a pretty popular class. It's application based. So I think so I've always had this interest. I've only really worked before the GSB at really big companies, with Accenture, very kind of the classic Fortune 500 companies. And so I had this interest in working for a smaller company, doing my internship there, and then ultimately, joining a small startup after the GSB. So I think it was just really helpful for me to get this taste of what is it like to basically start with nothing but an idea with 4 people and, you know, be together in a room. You know, we probably worked about 20 hours a week plus on this idea, and with classmates that, you know, you think are your friends, and, you know, you really don't know someone until you start working with them. And so, not that we had, you know, there was obviously conflict, but there was also just like wonderful moments of like, wow, you know, you're great at specializing in this and you specialize this, but I want to learn about this. So I think I learned a lot about just working with people and just leadership in general, and how to, you know, if you have a different direction on this idea, how do you sort of voice it and get, you know, the other 3 people to go along with it. So I think that was definitely a highlight for me.
What was the product, just out of curiosity, for those who don't know what Startup Garage is?
So we started with an idea. So our idea was basically, as I mentioned, I worked at WeWork last summer. I also have an art major. So our idea was basically, there's this crazy stat that is only 5% of films that are produced actually make it to theaters. Now, obviously different, nothing's in theaters right now, but so there's basically all this content that's out there that basically doesn't find distribution. It might go direct to Netflix or, you know, direct to another platform. And so we were basically interested in, you know, is there a way to basically leverage underutilized spaces? So say like a coffee shop that closes down at 7 p.m. Could we rent it until 9, bring a portable projector and basically stream a movie for a, you know, budding film director. And so we were kind of interested in this kind of Airbnb for small format cinema.
Cool.
We called ourselves Minima. It actually, the company has sort of pivoted, and I'm no longer involved, which I can expand on later. But yeah, it was a really just fascinating experience with kind of the intersection of, you know, business and art, which is where I'm interested in.
Awesome. Thank you. How about you, Jack? How did your leadership transform at the GSB?
Yeah, great question. I think for me, the course that was most impactful was touchy-feely or interpersonal dynamics. I think the reason for that is because, you know, the GSB teaches you many leadership models, but doesn't tell you there's a right way, because it's all individual to you as a leader. So I think leading to that, then interpersonal dynamics for me was the most impactful, because it helped me understand myself and the impact that I have on people out of all the courses at the GSB the most, which I can then transition to, well, how do I then show up, and what does that mean in terms of my own leadership style? This was a very interesting class. As a Brit, the thought of being sat in a room with 11 people with no real agenda, actually saying what we think about each other, was really scary, as we have a way in the UK of saying everything but what we think. So for me, it was just fascinating to really spend time with a group of peers and learn about the impact that you have on them, and how other people impact you, and take those learnings and then apply it to, well, how does that mean that I show up as a person and as a leader?
Is there an example? I'm not going to put you on the spot. You don't have to give us it. Sometimes it's hard to understand what the concrete learning is. And I think that was in the question of something you learned in touchy-feely.
Yeah, so I think one of the things I learned was that, I'll give you a really basic example. I use humor a lot to diffuse situations, and sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't. And so what it was really great for me was understanding when taking the heat out of a situation or using humor to build the group is useful, and actually when it's a detractor. And so that was just one example of hundreds of things that I learned, but just getting enough reps to understand, okay, this is a really useful skill, but I have to choose when to use it at the right time.
I love that. So it sounds like managing conflict productively, and what are the tools? That's great. Thank you. I'm going to go to the next question. So Diego's asking from New Jersey, can you spend a little time telling us about why you decided to go to business school? So some have pivoted industries and others haven't, and wanted a little insight into that. And Will, maybe we'll start with you, because you didn't pivot industries and decide to go to business school. Maybe you can share that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think there were kind of three things that led me to take the business school experience. One was I wanted the kind of a safe opportunity to test out other things, even though I knew I was going back to Bain. Business school was kind of an awesome way for me to think about what I wanted to do long term. So I did my master's in education at the same time, and I got the chance to work with a lot of different nonprofits while I was in B school and kind of understand where I want to fit into that space down the road. And then the second thing for me was to build a network outside of just my college peers and my company, and in particular, build a network that was going to be international. And that has been really amazing. We can talk a little bit about it later, but I think the GSB network is more powerful than I could ever even have possibly imagined. I remember like 2 weeks into school, someone posted on our Slack channel that one of her friends had gotten into trouble in South Sudan. And she was like, "Do you know anyone we can call?" And within like 5 minutes, like 3 or 4 people had given her the names of like diplomats or ambassadors or people in South Sudan. And I was like, wow, if the GSB can give us contacts in South Sudan, there's probably nowhere in the world that we're not going to have kind of people at our back. And then for me, finally, I was just really kind of burned out after 3 years of work. I was tired. I wanted the chance to kind of refresh. And what I found was that Stanford like got me excited again about a lot of the things that I was working on, helped me to step back, think about my career as not like a couple of years as a hard work, but really as kind of a 40-year journey and all of the interesting places that could take me. So those were the reasons that I ended up, and I think the GSB kind of knocked it out of the park on all of those dimensions.
Awesome. And how's it feel to be back at Bain now? How are you different in the role now? So that's why you went. If you look back,
Yeah.
What was the value for you?
One thing I think that I was talking to a few people about this who had done consulting and then gone back to very similar roles in consulting, and we all felt way better at our jobs. And that actually in some ways was not something that we were expecting. Like there were a lot of things we were expecting to get out of B school. I actually wasn't expecting to feel that much better because so much of what you learn is learned on the job. But I think it really helped with maturity, with being able to step back and you just during B school you have the chance to examine so many cases, to meet with so many important speakers, that it almost feels like it gave me like greater gravitas and a greater ability to like bring in experiences that I had seen at the GSB. And I've actually used a lot of what I learned in classes, frameworks or ways of thinking or case studies, and that has surprised me and been kind of a nice and pleasant surprise.
Awesome. How about Michelle? I didn't give you a heads up early. How are you thinking about pivoting from into gaming and product marketing?
Yeah, totally. So I mentioned I was at Accenture. I was there for 3 years. But my background is somewhat unique. I was told at least at my university, I was the only one that has ever majored in finance and fine art. So those are my majors. Just basically the story behind that is I'm passionate about both things. I love business. I think like business is kind of everything. But then I also love, I'm a film junkie. I love going to Sundance. I actually lived in Park City for 4 years. And so I knew I always had this interest in entertainment. I did work with a few media entertainment clients when I was at Accenture, and I really liked that. It was like the most hip clients I kind of had. But I knew I wanted to do something smaller, and something more creative. I can't say I felt super creative in my role and was really leveraging and kind of playing to that strength. And so I came back to business school. I was interested in one, kind of pivoting industries, but also being in more of an operating role and in a product role close to the business and in operations. And so I ended up sort of for the summer trying something out at WeWork in an operating role, and actually really liked that type of role. But I wasn't quite in the industry that I wanted. And so was able to find something at a small gaming startup for full time. And so, I think it was a result of lots of, networking with alumni, just speaking with them. I mentioned the startup garage experience really impacting kind of my interest in entertainment, and specifically gaming. And so that was sort of my rationale for coming back, and hopefully it goes well when I start in a couple weeks.
Awesome. And the next question was about the culture. And Aditi, I'm going to ask this one to you. Alyssa's asking, what makes a GSB culture unique and what sets it apart from other MBA programs? So I don't expect you to speak about other programs, but as a Dean of Admissions, I keep calling it magic. And that's pretty high level how you describe it. So what tactically is it like to be part of the culture?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it is magical. It's hard to sometimes sum it up into words, but I think, what really stands out to me is how supportive of a program it is. I think I was always interested in getting my MBA. Over the course of like the first few years that I was working, got a better and better understanding of what I hoped to get out of the program. Many of my reasons for going kind of similar to Will in terms of, really it's a safe space to experiment and learn. I used to look at the other people who worked around me who had MBAs and really admired their skills in terms of how to manage teams or work with teams, their presence, their ability to present well. But I think what I just didn't expect going into it was how I'd come out of it with the closest friends of my life. And like, truly like my lifelong friends. I got married a couple of years ago and all of my, most of my bridal party was from the GSB. And I didn't expect that going into business school. I kind of thought I'd found my, closest friends from college and everything, but I think there's just something different. And maybe part of it is, it's just in some ways a very intense 2 years, right? It's busy, between classes and extracurriculars and the social component, it's quite busy. And then the kinds of classes you're taking, to go through experiences like interpersonal dynamics, they're not easy courses, or Startup Garage, where you're really learning how to kind of work with each other in a different way. I think what I just didn't expect was how helpful and supportive everyone would be. You ask somebody for guidance or for advice, or you want to talk to them about what it was like to work in this industry or that, or you don't know how to do your operations homework or your accounting homework, and everyone will drop everything to help you. And I think that's pretty special. And I can't speak to whether that sets it apart necessarily from other programs, but I guess it went beyond my expectations.
Is there someone else who wants to jump in? Any of the other panelists who feel strongly about the culture? All right, Jack.
I can quickly jump in. So the community feel is amazing, as was just described. But like one small example would be, I'd spoken to a friend and said, "Oh, I'm thinking of recruiting for these kind of roles," in passing in the coffee shop. And then 2 days later, I'm walking through campus, through Town Square, and he stops me and he says, "Oh, just so you know, these two companies are on campus in the next 2 days. I spoke to them, I gave them your name, let me know if you need any help. Let me know if you want to chat through anything," and like went on his way. I'd forgotten I'd even told them the type of thing that I was interested in. And he'd gone out of his way then to think about who he knew, think about who he could put me in touch with, coach me through the process. And that's not unusual for homework, for people, for events, for trips, for any class. I think people are always thinking about their classmates, their friends, how they can help and support and how they can be there. I think that's just one example in a professional context of how it happened, but it happens in a personal context all the time.
That's awesome. I want to make sure we cover the global experience. So Eric, maybe you could, you're nodding, I see your head. You want to share? We have a global experience requirement. There are many ways that you can fulfill that as a student, but perhaps talk to what you did.
Yeah, happy to. So I chose to do a couple experiences, both formal and informal. Informal is many classmates were from various countries wanted to create experiences for people to come and walk a little bit in their shoes, and those were some of my favorite experiences. Two formal ones, I did the STEP program, which was an exchange program with Tsinghua University in China, and I also did a global study trip, which to Mexico. And the Mexico trip, I had been to Mexico briefly before, but it was a experience that I could not have done anywhere else. Um, and I think a few things that stood out about it. One was the leaders were extremely thoughtful and extremely vulnerable in how they shared their own personal stories and how that intersected with the country. And so I could see it not only from my lens and my classmates, but also from the way they were viewing things. So, for example, one of the students had attended Harvard, and I think he had had a scholarship there earlier on in his life. And there was a number, it became actually like a national controversy at the time where people were talking about like, hey, why are we helping this person whose family had come into the US illegally versus someone who was born in the US? And so hearing him talk about that story and then together as a group crossing the border in Tijuana gave it a really different experience. And so I think like the global experiences, I think helped us really go to a much deeper level in understanding each other. And then they were also extremely fun, and we went to like just great places we wouldn't have been to otherwise. And the chance to spend so much time with each other going through these once in a lifetime experiences, I think was one of the major ways that I made some of my closest friends.
That's awesome. I'm looking at the time, and I'd like all of you to give me a wrap-up comment. And I think one of the questions that came in is if you had any words of advice. So if someone's admitted to the GSB and you're looking back, what advice would you give them about coming to the school? So how about I'll start with you, Will.
Yeah, sure thing. Well, so first of all, you should definitely come. I know some people get into business school and they're like, oh, like, should I do it? It's definitely worth it. And there was not a single person I knew in my class who didn't think it was worth it by like a mile. The one other thing I'd say is it makes a lot of sense to like plan in advance because it is really like an overwhelming experience. There's so much going on. There's so many interesting people to meet that I think it's really helpful to have a sense of what you want to get out of it. And it's really okay if what you want to get out of it is, trying something or testing something that turns out to not be at all what you want to do. There's always, that's actually a really helpful learning. But I think it's worth planning in advance. And then the other thing I think is just like throwing yourself in and not letting it slip by. I mean, when I look back at the GSB, I have very few regrets, but the only things I regret are like, if anything, not trying to do more, not making more time to do all of those things. Because it is such a unique two-year experience surrounded by incredible people with unlimited resources and opportunities at your disposal. So I think you want to make the most of that.
Hey, Aditi, how about you give us a wrap on this question too, please? Some advice.
Sure, yeah. So I think I would say that, let's see, I was going to say kind of what Will was saying, but I mean, I think being really open to new experiences, I think people have different comfort levels of how much they want to try new things versus not, versus kind of sticking with like the types of classes that they know they'll do well in, or like the types of friends that they used to have prior to business school. I just think that it's such an opportunity to push yourself outside of your comfort zone. Take that class that you don't have a background in at all, or spend time with people who just aren't like the rest of your friends so far. There's never going to really be another opportunity to do that, and it might surprise you in terms of what you find that you like.
I'm looking at the time. Anybody else want to jump in? Eric, Michelle, or Jack with some advice? Okay, Michelle.
Right.
Yeah,
it's sort of similar, but yeah, I completely agree with the comments about being open to a bunch of different types of experience. But if there's one thing that can summarize the last 2 years, it is incredibly busy, and I think just having the ability to focus and have maybe a few things that you really know you want to prioritize and get involved in. I think just an example, like for example, like in the fall of second year, you're going to see a lot of your classmates recruiting for consulting, and for a while I was like, should I recruit for another consulting firm, you know? But I was like, no, like I came here to do this and I want to stay true to that. And so I think kind of being your own person and focusing, like I took like art classes across the street, even though like, you know, no one else and it was sort of doing that. Just the ability to focus and, yeah, like I said, be your own person, I think is some good advice I'd give.
That's awesome. Jack, you were nodding your head. Did you want to say one last thing as well?
Yeah, just those ruthless priorities and make sure you have a good system for holding yourself to account. I remember, you know, week one, student life telling me about, you know, proactively calendaring. I can remember being sat there going, I'm a grown up, I can manage my calendar. You know, I used to turn businesses around, and then 2 days later, I'm like quadruple booked 4 times in the same day. And I felt it's like trying to drink from a fire hose. So, you know, have the ruthless priorities, find somebody outside of the GSB to hold you to account. And somebody that you can come back to and say, okay, do I really need this brown bag lunch, or am I just going for the sandwich, you know?
That's great. And finally, Eric, why don't you help us close?
Yeah. So I'll say something that builds on what a number of others have said, which is, I'd say the main thing is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. When you first come, there can be an incredible rush to do everything, to try everything, to meet everyone. And I personally think that I would have gone farther and gotten even more out of it if I had taken the time to get to know each person a little bit more. If I'd taken the time to think of it not as a 2-year sprint, actually like 2 years is a meaningful chunk of life. And there's a lot that you can get done there if you set yourself up where it's a way that you could continue if it were the rest of your life. And so I think if you find a way, even if it's hard to prioritize, to slow down and spend that extra 30 minutes with someone versus 20 short coffee chats, or you spend that extra time on that case to go deeper on it, that you may find that you'll learn more quickly what it is that you want to do. And that ultimately leads you to knowing more people who will stay close to your heart. So I'd encourage you to go slow to go fast.
That's great. Well, I think that's a wonderful place to end. I'm going to share just a couple more slides, but want to thank Jack, Michelle, Will, Aditi, Eric. Thank you so much for being here. So Stanford, here's a quick picture of our courtyard. We call it Town Square in the GSB buildings. And when this campus was built just 8 years ago, the cornerstone actually says, dedicated to the things that haven't happened yet and the people who are about to dream them up. And I think that really captures the essence of Stanford. We hope if you've come today that you see yourself as a big dreamer and you'll be interested in learning more. Stanford is really built for people like you. And if you want to learn more, you've got a chance to hear from some of our wonderful alumni. But as I said earlier, feel free to book an information session if you really want to think about admissions and what we're looking for. There's also industry panels. For instance, if you are looking for a career in finance, come hear from a whole panel of finance alumni and students. And then we have added in the last 18 months some small group chats, which is really about 10 prospects with either an admissions officer or a student. So it's a more intimate environment where you can get your individual questions answered. Please, if I didn't get, there are many questions in the chat. If I didn't get to yours, you can also email us on the web. We appreciate that. And just in closing, if you do come to Stanford, we believe that it will really open your horizons, your self-narrative of what you can accomplish. We think it'll teach you to think boldly, think innovatively. It'll help you develop your leadership capabilities so others will want to follow you. And finally, it will help you define the path, not just for these next 2 years, but for the next 40 years. So you can see our mission, and we really try to live it at Stanford each and every day. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a good one.